My daughter-in-law blocked me for 10 years. Then the day she learned I had money, she showed up at my front door with 3 suitcases. I didn't yell. I didn't slam the door. I just smiled. What happened next surprised everyone, including her. I'm glad you're here. Stay with me until the end of my story, and tell me in the comments which city you're watching from. I always wonder how far stories like mine travel. The morning she came back was quiet. The kind of quiet that usually brings peace. Soft sunlight slipped through the tall windows of my living room, landing across the oak floor in long golden rectangles. I was standing in my kitchen making coffee. The house smelled faintly of cinnamon and roasted beans. My new place sat on the edge of a small lake outside Asheville, North Carolina. Nothing fancy by billionaire standards, but for someone like me, a 72-year-old woman who once counted every dollar, it felt like a palace. The kettle clicked off. I poured the water slowly into my French press and waited. Outside, the water on the lake was still like a sheet of glass. A pair of ducks drifted past the dock. For a moment, everything felt calm. Then the doorbell rang. One sharp chime. I frowned. Most mornings I didn't see anyone except the occasional delivery truck, or my neighbor walking his golden retriever. I wiped my hands on a towel and walked down the hallway. The bell rang again. This time longer. Impatient. I opened the front door. And for a second, I didn't recognize her. 10 years changes a person. Her hair was lighter, almost platinum blonde now. Her designer sunglasses were pushed up on top of her head, and she wore a beige trench coat that probably cost more than my old monthly grocery budget. But I knew that face. Romy. My daughter-in-law. Behind her stood my son, Daniel. And next to them on the stone walkway sat 3 large rolling suitcases. For a moment none of us spoke. The breeze lifted the edge of her coat. She looked me up and down slowly, as if inspecting a stranger. Then she smiled. Not the warm kind. The calculated kind. Mom, she said sweetly, stretching the word in a way that felt almost theatrical. I hadn't heard her call me that in over a decade. My son shifted his weight awkwardly beside her. Hi, Mom. His voice sounded smaller than I remembered. Older too. I leaned lightly against the door frame. Well, I said calmly. This is unexpected. Romy clasped her hands together dramatically. We were just in the area and thought we should visit. Her eyes slipped past me, scanning the house behind my shoulder. The high ceilings. The wide staircase. The view of the lake. She noticed everything. People like Romy always do. Her gaze returned to me. You look wonderful, she added. That word hung in the air like perfume. Artificial. I noticed the way her eyes lingered on my watch. A simple gold piece my late husband had given me 40 years ago. It was old, but people who understood jewelry knew exactly what it was worth. Behind her, Daniel cleared his throat. Mom, we heard you moved here recently. I nodded. About a year ago. The suitcases sat between us like silent witnesses. I tilted my head slightly. Are you going somewhere? Romy laughed lightly. Oh, these. She nudged one with the toe of her shoe. Just some things. Something about the way she said it made my stomach tighten. I had seen that look before. 10 years earlier. The last time we had stood face to face. Back then, I still lived in the old house Daniel grew up in. A modest 2-story place outside Charlotte. My husband had passed away 6 months earlier, and the quiet in that house felt like a second funeral. Romy had come over one evening with Daniel. She sat at my dining table with the same posture she had now. Straight back, perfect smile, eyes that calculated every inch of the room. Halfway through dinner she had leaned forward and said something I would never forget. Daniel, and I think it would be better if you gave us some space. I remember blinking. Space. Yes, she said gently, like a teacher explaining something simple to a slow student. We're building our own life now. Daniel stared at his plate. I waited for him to speak. He didn't. That was the first sign. The second came a week later. I tried calling him. The phone went straight to voicemail. Again the next day. And the next. Finally one evening I received a short text message. Please stop calling. Romy and I need boundaries. Asterisk asterisk. That was the last message my son sent me for 10 years. After that, my calls wouldn't go through. My emails bounced back. My number had been blocked. First I thought it was a mistake. Then I realized the truth. Romy had erased me. And Daniel had let her. Standing on my front porch now, I studied their faces carefully. 10 years of silence. 10 years without birthdays, holidays, or even a single phone call. And suddenly they were here. With luggage. Romy shifted slightly, her smile tightening. "Are you going to invite us in?" she asked. I looked down at the suitcases again, then back at her. And that was when I noticed something else. Hope. A greedy little spark behind her eyes. She knew something, which meant she had heard the news. News travels quickly when money is involved, especially the kind of money people never expected someone like me to have. I stepped aside slowly. "Well," I said, "you've already come all this way." They rolled their suitcases inside. Romy paused in the foyer, staring upward at the chandelier above the staircase. Her lips parted slightly. "This place is beautiful," she whispered. Daniel nodded quietly. Neither of them asked how I could afford it, but they both wondered. I could see the question burning behind their polite expressions. I walked toward the kitchen. "Coffee?" I asked. "Yes, please," Romy answered quickly. Of course she did. As she sat down at my table, the same calm table where I now ate breakfast every morning alone, she placed her designer purse carefully beside her chair. Her eyes moved slowly across the room again. The hardwood floors, the lake view, the quiet wealth. And for the first time in 10 years, my daughter-in-law looked at me like I mattered. I poured 3 cups of coffee, set them on the table. Then I sat down across from them. Romy wrapped both hands around the mug. "So," she said lightly, "it looks like life has been very good to you." I met her gaze and smiled again, because what she didn't realize yet was that the woman she had blocked for 10 years no longer needed anything from them. Not love, not forgiveness, and definitely not family. And that was her first mistake. Romy took a slow sip of her coffee, watching me over the rim of the mug. People who want something rarely rush. They circle first. "So," she said, setting the cup down carefully, "this place must be expensive." I shrugged lightly. "It's comfortable." Daniel sat quietly beside her, his hands wrapped around his own mug. He hadn't looked at me directly since they walked in. 10 years. And the first thing he said to his mother was hi. The silence stretched across the table for a moment. Outside the window, the lake shimmered under the late morning sun. Finally Daniel cleared his throat. "We heard about your investment." There it was. Straight to the point. I leaned back slightly in my chair. "Did you?" Romy's smile returned immediately, wider this time. "Oh, people talk. Especially when someone suddenly becomes very successful." She glanced around the kitchen again. Her eyes paused on the granite countertops. The lake view. The quiet wealth. I watched her carefully. 10 years ago, she never looked at my home this way. Back then, she treated it like something temporary. Something beneath her. I remembered the last afternoon she had stood in my old living room. The curtains were still drawn from the funeral. My husband's photo sat on the mantel. Romy stood near the doorway, arms folded, while Daniel paced nervously across the carpet. "You can't keep depending on Daniel," she had said calmly. I blinked at her. "I'm not depending on anyone." She tilted her head. "Then maybe it's time to learn how to stand on your own." Daniel didn't defend me. He didn't say a word. That night was the last time I saw my son, until today. Back in the kitchen, Romy folded her hands neatly on the table. "We thought," she said slowly, "maybe this is a good time for family to reconnect." Family. The word sounded strange coming from her mouth. I lifted my coffee and took a slow sip. For 10 years I celebrated birthdays alone. 10 Christmas mornings with no phone call. 10 years wondering if my own son ever thought about me. Now they were sitting in my kitchen, with 3 suitcases. And suddenly, they remembered I existed. I set my mug down quietly. "Well," I said, "that's interesting timing." Romy's smile tightened just a little, because deep down, she knew I had already figured it out. Romy leaned back slightly in her chair, crossing her legs with the same graceful confidence she always had. The sunlight from the lake window caught the gold buckle on her shoe, flashing briefly across the floor. "You know," she said casually, 10 years is a long time." I nodded. "Yes. It is. Daniel finally looked up from his coffee. His eyes met mine for only a second before drifting away again. There was something uncomfortable in that glance. Not anger. Not warmth either. Just distance. The kind that forms when people choose silence for too long. Romy tilted her head, studying me as if she were trying to measure something invisible. We were young back then, she continued smoothly. Maybe we made mistakes. Maybe. The word hung in the air like a fragile excuse. I rested my hands lightly on the table. For 10 years? I asked. She laughed softly. Well, life gets busy. I didn't answer. Because both of us knew the truth. Life hadn't been busy. It had simply been easier to pretend I didn't exist. I remembered the first Christmas after they blocked me. The house felt painfully quiet that morning. I still put up the small artificial tree my husband and I had used for years. I wrapped 2 gifts for Daniel out of habit before realizing there was nowhere to send them. The phone never rang. Later that afternoon I saw a photo online. Daniel and Romy smiling in front of a massive Christmas tree at her parents' house. Her caption read, *perfect holiday with the people who matter most. I stared at that sentence for a long time. Not angry. Just aware. Back in the kitchen, Romy reached forward and gently touched the edge of the table. This is really a beautiful home, she said again. Daniel nodded slowly. You must have done very well with that company. There it was again. Not a question. An opening. I watched the two of them carefully. They had barely asked about my health. Not about the past. Not about the 10 years we lost. Only the house. The investment. The success. And the suitcases by the front door suddenly made much more sense. Romy folded her hands neatly again and gave me a warm practiced smile. You know, she said softly, families should stick together. Especially when life changes. I met her eyes. And for a moment neither of us spoke. Because we both understood something now. They hadn't come back for me. They had come back for what they thought I had. And the conversation we were about to have was only just beginning. For a few seconds no one spoke. The quiet inside my kitchen felt heavier than before. The clock on the wall ticked softly, each second stretching longer than it should. Romy finally broke the silence. Well, she said gently, people grow. Families change. I nodded slowly. Yes, they do. Daniel shifted in his chair again. He looked uncomfortable now, like someone sitting in a meeting he didn't want to attend. Mom, he said quietly, we probably should have reached out sooner. Probably. I studied his face. When he was little, Daniel used to run into the house after school and tell me everything. Every test score. Every small victory. Every problem. Now he couldn't even look at me for more than 2 seconds. Time changes people. Or maybe it simply reveals who they already were. Romy reached across the table and gently placed her hand over Daniel's arm. The gesture looked supportive. But I knew her well enough to recognize control. You know, she said, her voice softer now. When Daniel heard about your investment, he was really proud. Proud. That word felt strange too. Because when I was struggling 10 years ago, pride had never come up. Back then life was very different. After my husband died, the bills started piling up faster than I expected. Medical costs, property taxes, repairs on the old house. I remember one evening standing in the kitchen with a stack of envelopes, trying to figure out which bill I could delay another month. Daniel came by that night. For a moment I thought he had come to help. Instead, Romy walked in behind him, looked around the house, and said something that stayed with me for years. You can't expect Daniel to carry you forever. I had stared at her, confused. I'm not asking him to. She shrugged. Still, it's not a good look. A week later my number was blocked. Just like that. Back in the present, Romy smiled at me across the table. And when we heard how well you did with that company, she continued, Daniel said we should come see you immediately. I turned slowly toward my son. Did you? Daniel hesitated. Then he nodded. Yeah. I thought it was time. Time. 10 years later. I glanced toward the hallway where their suitcases still sat near the front door. 3 large ones. Packed carefully. Prepared for more than a short visit. I folded my hands on the table. So tell me, I said calmly, how long were you planning to stay? Romy blinked once when I asked the question. Just once. But it was enough. People reveal more in their pauses than in their words. Oh, she said lightly, waving her hand as if the idea had never crossed her mind. We didn't really make a strict plan. I nodded slowly. Of course they hadn't. Daniel shifted again in his chair. Well, actually, he began carefully, our lease ended last week. There it was. Romy shot him a quick glance, but the sentence was already out. She recovered quickly, smiling again. We thought maybe a little change would be nice, she said smoothly. A fresh start. I looked at her. Then at Daniel. Then toward the hallway where their 3 suitcases were still waiting quietly by the door. 10 years of silence. And now they had nowhere else to go. Interesting timing. I picked up my coffee and took another small sip. You sold your place? I asked. Daniel nodded. Yeah, the market was good. And you didn't buy another one yet. He hesitated. Not yet. Romy leaned forward slightly, resting her elbows on the table like someone settling into a friendly conversation. Well, she said warmly, we figured maybe this is the perfect opportunity to spend some time together. Rebuild things. Rebuild. Such a hopeful word. I watched her face carefully. Not once had she said the word sorry. Not once had Daniel asked how those 10 years felt for me. No apologies. No explanations. Just suitcases. And a sudden interest in family again. Romy continued talking, her voice soft and reassuring. You shouldn't be living alone in a place this big anyway, she added. It's safer if family is around. Safer. I almost smiled at that. 10 years ago, when I was struggling to keep the lights on, safety had never been part of the conversation. Back then, silence had been easier for them. Daniel finally looked up again. We could help around the house, he said. Take care of things. Romy nodded quickly. Yes, exactly. We'd be good company for you. Company. I set my cup down carefully. The porcelain touched the table with a soft click. Then I leaned back slightly in my chair. You know, I said calmly, this house has 3 guest rooms. Both of them looked relieved immediately. But I wasn't finished. And I rarely use any of them. Romy's smile widened. Daniel relaxed a little. They thought the conversation was going exactly the way they hoped. They didn't realize something yet. For 10 years I had lived alone. 10 years to learn how quiet can sharpen your understanding of people. 10 years to understand exactly what someone wants the moment they walk through your door. And sitting across from me now, my daughter-in-law wanted something very specific. She just hadn't said it out loud yet. Romy's smile stayed in place, but I noticed the small shift in her posture. People relax when they think they've won. Daniel leaned forward slightly now, resting his elbows on the table. That's really generous of you, Mom, he said. Generous. The word almost made me laugh. For 10 years I had learned something very useful about generosity. People rarely remember it when they no longer need you. Romy glanced again toward the hallway where their suitcases waited. Then she looked back at me with that same polished expression. We wouldn't want to be a burden, she said sweetly. That sentence was carefully chosen. I could hear it, because 10 years ago she had used a very different word. Burden. That was the word she used when she thought I couldn't hear her. I remembered the afternoon clearly. Daniel and Romy were standing in my backyard after my husband's funeral. I had stepped inside to bring out lemonade for the guests who were still visiting. When I came back toward the door, I heard Romy speaking quietly to Daniel. She's going to expect you to take care of her now, she said. Daniel didn't answer right away. Then he sighed. I know. Her voice dropped lower. That's not the life we want, Daniel. I stood there behind the screen door for a long moment before walking back inside. Neither of them knew I had heard. Back in the kitchen now, Romy lifted her coffee again. We'll only stay until we figure out our next step, she continued gently. A few weeks, maybe. Daniel nodded. Just temporary. Temporary. Funny how temporary things can stretch when money is involved. I stood slowly from my chair. Well, I said, you must be tired after traveling. Romy looked relieved immediately. Yes, actually. It was a long drive. I walked toward the hallway. Let me show you the guest rooms. Their suitcases rolled across the hardwood floor behind me as we moved down the hall. The wheels made a soft humming sound that echoed through the house. When we reached the first guest room, I opened the door. It was simple but comfortable. A queen bed, a dresser, a window that looked out toward the trees behind the house. Romy stepped inside first. "Oh, this is perfect," she said. Daniel set one of the suitcases near the bed. The second room was next door. And the third room sat at the end of the hallway. 3 guest rooms. 3 suitcases. Everything looked very convenient. Romy turned toward me again. "Thank you for doing this," she said. I gave a small nod. Family helps family. She smiled at that, as she thought I meant it the same way she did. But while they unpacked their luggage and settled into the rooms, I was already thinking about something else, because there was one detail they didn't know yet. One small decision I had made months ago, and once they discovered it, their plans for this house would change very quickly. That afternoon passed quietly. Daniel stayed in the second guest room most of the time, probably answering emails or pretending to be busy. I could hear the faint sound of his laptop keys through the hallway. Romy, on the other hand, explored. People like her always do. I noticed the way she moved slowly through the house, pausing in each doorway. The living room, the back deck, the dining area that looked out across the lake. Every few minutes I would catch her glancing at something. The hardwood floors, the artwork on the walls, the view of the water. She wasn't admiring it. She was calculating it. Later in the afternoon, I found her standing on the back deck. The lake stretched wide and quiet in front of us. A soft breeze moved across the surface, making small ripples in the sunlight. "This view is incredible," she said without turning around. "It's peaceful," I replied. She nodded slowly. "You must have made a fortune with that company." I leaned against the railing. "It did well." That answer was enough for her. Romy turned toward me then, resting her arms on the deck rail as if we were having a casual conversation between family members who had never been apart. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "Daniel and I have been talking." I waited. "When we heard about your investment, it really made us think." I didn't ask what they were thinking. She continued anyway. "You shouldn't have to handle everything alone at your age." There it was again. That tone. Concern wrapped around something else. "I manage just fine," I said calmly. "Oh, I'm sure you do," she replied quickly. "But things happen. Maintenance, taxes, insurance." Her eyes drifted across the house behind me. "A property like this must require a lot of attention." I understood where the conversation was going long before she finished the sentence. Romy smiled gently. "Daniel's always been good with financial planning," she added. "He could help you organize things." Organize. Another carefully chosen word. I watched her quietly. 10 years ago, she didn't want me anywhere near their life. Now she wanted to organize my finances. Funny how success changes people's priorities. Just then the sliding door opened behind us. Daniel stepped onto the deck. "Dinner smells good," he said. I had started a pot roast earlier that afternoon. The scent of carrots and rosemary drifted out from the kitchen. "Almost ready," I told him. Romy stood up straight and brushed imaginary dust from her coat. "Perfect," she said brightly. As the 3 of us walked back into the house, I noticed something else. Daniel looked around the dining room again. The furniture. The silverware. The quiet comfort of the place. Then he said something that confirmed exactly what I had already suspected. "This house must be worth a lot now." I smiled slightly as I set the plates on the table, because at that moment, my son wasn't looking at his mother's home. He was looking at an opportunity. And unfortunately for them, they still had no idea who actually controlled everything in this house. Dinner was quiet at first. The 3 of us sat around the table while the evening light faded over the lake outside the windows. The room filled with the soft clink of silverware, and the slow rhythm of people pretending everything was normal. Romy complimented the food twice. Daniel asked if I still liked living in North Carolina. Small talk. Safe topics. But underneath it all, I could feel the tension building like pressure in a sealed jar. Finally Romy set down her fork and looked directly at me. "You've done very well for yourself," she said again. I wiped my hands with my napkin. "I've been fortunate." Daniel leaned forward slightly. "What exactly did you invest in?" he asked. There was curiosity in his voice. but also something else. Calculation. I poured a little more water into my glass before answering. A small technology company, I said. A friend asked if I wanted to invest a few years ago. Daniel's eyebrows lifted. And it paid off? Yes. Romy exchanged a quick glance with him. The look lasted only a second, but it told me everything I needed to know. She reached for her wine glass. Well, that's amazing, she said warmly. It must have changed your life. I thought about that for a moment. Yes, I said finally. It did. But not in the way she imagined. Money hadn't changed my life. Loneliness had. 10 years of silence had taught me things I never would have learned otherwise. Across the table, Daniel leaned back in his chair. So what are your plans now? He asked. Plans? With the money, he clarified. I looked at him quietly. It had taken less than 12 hours for the conversation to reach this point. Romy jumped in quickly. Oh, Daniel just means you should think about the future, she said. Estate planning, things like that. Estate planning. Such a polite phrase. Her eyes moved slowly around the dining room again. The house. The land. The quiet security of it all. You've worked hard your whole life, she continued. It's important to make sure everything is handled properly. I nodded. You're right. Both of them relaxed slightly, because they thought we were finally talking about the same thing. Daniel cleared his throat. Have you already set up a will? He asked. The question hung in the air. I took another sip of water before answering. Yes, I said calmly. Romy's smile widened. That's wonderful, she replied quickly. It's always better when families handle these things early. I placed my glass down gently. The table went quiet again. Because there was one detail they hadn't asked about yet. Not who was in the will. Not who controlled the house. And not what I had already arranged months before they ever knocked on my door. I looked at both of them across the table and smiled slightly, 'cause very soon they were going to learn exactly how carefully I had planned my future. After dinner, Daniel helped carry the dishes to the sink. Surprised me a little. When he was a teenager, he hated doing dishes. He used to disappear the moment dinner was finished, leaving me alone in the kitchen with the plates. Some habits return when people want something. Romy stayed at the table, slowly sipping the last of her wine. Her eyes followed Daniel and me as we moved around the kitchen. Watching. Waiting. When the dishes were done, Daniel wiped his hands on a towel and leaned against the counter. Mom, he said carefully, you mentioned earlier that you already set up a will. I nodded. Yes. Romy turned her chair slightly so she could see both of us. That's really responsible, she said. A lot of people wait too long to think about those things. I dried my hands and placed the towel neatly beside the sink. It seemed like the right time, I said. Daniel hesitated before asking the next question. Who helped you with it? A lawyer here in Asheville. Romy's eyes brightened slightly. A good one, I hope. He's very thorough. That answer seemed to satisfy her. She leaned back comfortably in her chair now, as if the conversation had finally reached the point she had been waiting for all evening. You know, she said casually, estate planning can get complicated. Sometimes families misunderstand things later if everything isn't clear. I watched her for a moment. 10 years ago she didn't want anything to do with my life. Now she was concerned about misunderstandings. Daniel crossed his arms lightly. So everything's organized, he asked. Yes. The house too. Yes. And your investments? All of it. The kitchen went quiet again. I could almost hear the gears turning in their heads. Romy stood up slowly and walked toward the window. The moonlight had started reflecting across the lake outside. This really is a beautiful property, she said softly. Then she turned back toward me. You must want to make sure it stays in the family. I met her eyes. That depends on what you mean by family. For a second, neither of them answered. Daniel finally stepped forward. Well, you know what we mean. I nodded slowly. Yes, I knew exactly what they meant. They were already imagining the future. The house. The money. The inheritance. What they didn't realize yet was that months before they ever showed up with those suitcases, I had already made one very important decision. And when they found out what it was, The word family was going to sound very different to them. The kitchen grew very quiet after Romy said that. You must want to make sure it stays in the family. The sentence hung in the air between us like a carefully placed trap. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I walked slowly to the sink and rinsed my glass. The sound of running water filled the silence for a few seconds. Behind me, I could feel both of them watching. Waiting. People are very patient when they think money might be involved. I turned off the faucet and dried my hands. When you get to my age, I said calmly, you learn that planning ahead is important. Daniel nodded quickly. Exactly. Romy smiled. That's what we've been saying. I leaned lightly against the counter. My lawyer actually told me the same thing. That caught their attention. Daniel straightened a little. You've been working with him for a while? For several months. Romy walked slowly back toward the table and rested her hand on the chair. That's good, she said. You don't want people taking advantage of you. The irony almost made me laugh. 10 years ago, she didn't worry about people taking advantage of me. She only worried about how close I might be to Daniel. I pulled out a chair and sat down again. You're right, I said. The room stayed quiet. Daniel spoke next. So, everything's settled then? Yes. Romy tilted her head slightly. And the house? She asked. It's included. Daniel glanced toward the large windows that looked out over the lake. This place alone must be worth a lot. Property values around here have gone up, I replied. Romy's eyes lit up again. That's wonderful. Then she said the sentence she had clearly been waiting to say all evening. Well, she said gently, when the time eventually comes, it'll be nice knowing Daniel is here to take care of everything. Daniel nodded slowly beside her. Of course. I looked at both of them, my son, and the woman who had convinced him to erase me for 10 years. It was interesting watching them now. So confident. So certain about the future they had already imagined. Finally, I folded my hands calmly on the table. My lawyer actually suggested something else, I said. Romy blinked. What do you mean? I met her eyes. He suggested I make sure everything goes to people who were there when I needed them. The room went very still. Daniel frowned slightly. What does that mean? I gave a small polite smile. It means, I said quietly, that loyalty matters a lot when you're deciding who should receive your future. And for the first time since they arrived, I saw something flicker across Romy's face. Concern. Because suddenly, she wasn't as certain about her plan anymore. The next morning was quiet. Sunlight moved slowly across the lake outside my windows, the same way it had the day before. The house felt peaceful again. The kind of calm that only comes after something important has finally been settled. Daniel and Romy were sitting at the breakfast table when I walked into the kitchen. Neither of them had slept very well. I could see it in their faces. Romy's smile was gone. Daniel looked tired, older somehow. On the table between them sat the envelope my lawyer had prepared. The same envelope I had shown them the night before. Neither of them had said much after reading the documents. They didn't argue. They didn't yell. Sometimes silence says more than anger ever could. I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat down across from them. For a moment none of us spoke. Finally Daniel cleared his throat. So that's it? He asked quietly. I nodded. Yes. Inside that envelope were the papers explaining everything clearly. The house. The investment accounts. The rest of my estate. Most of it had already been transferred into a trust months ago. A trust created for something very specific. A small foundation that helps older people who were abandoned by their families. People who suddenly find themselves alone after spending their lives taking care of others. People like I once was. Romy folded her hands together tightly. So none of it stays in the family? She asked. I looked at her calmly. It does stay with the people who stood by me. She didn't answer. Because the truth was simple. For 10 years they weren't there. They didn't call. They didn't visit. They didn't even ask if I was still alive. And during those 10 years, I built a different life. A life with neighbors who checked on me. Friends who helped when things were difficult. People who showed up without expecting anything in return. Daniel stared at the table for a long moment. Then he stood up slowly. I guess we should start packing, he said. I nodded. That might be a good idea. Romy didn't argue this time. Within an hour, the suitcases that had arrived so confidently the day before were rolling back down the hallway. The wheels made the same soft humming sound across the floor. But this time they were heading toward the door. Daniel paused for a moment before stepping outside. He looked back at me. "Mom, I really did miss you." I studied his face carefully. Maybe he meant it. Maybe he didn't. Either way, some things in life can't be rebuilt after 10 years of silence. "I hope you find what you're looking for," I told him gently. Then they walked down the driveway. The car pulled away slowly. And just like that, the house was quiet again. I stood on the deck for a while afterward, looking out at the lake. The water moved gently under the morning sun. For a long time, I believed family was something you had to hold on to no matter what. But life teaches you something important when you get older. Family isn't about who shares your name. It's about who shows up when you need them. And sometimes, the people who truly stand by you are the ones you choose along the way. I finished my coffee and smiled at the peaceful view in front of me. Because after 10 years of silence, I had finally closed the door.